Hello again there, everybody. Coming to you live from a barbershop somewhere today because I got bored in quarantine and shaved my head. I was going bald anyway, it's fine. Um, Here we are at the end of another week, and I wanted to make a video to address a few things. One, I want to talk about the assignment that you just turned in. Two, I want to talk about what's coming up. And then three, I wanted to make, I'll go ahead and start with that one, a sort of something clear with everybody. So, the first thing is that all of you aren't watching the movies, all the videos, right? I don't know who is and who isn't. I can't see that. But I do get a count of how many times they've been opened. And they've been opened the exact number of times that match the number of people in our class. And I know my mom's watched them at least twice because I'm an only child. And then I showed them to my son once because he was wanting to see, oh, dad's got a video on YouTube. He's 3, so he's easily impressed. The point is, there are problems in some of the assignments. You're losing points because you're making mistakes that if you would watch the video, you may not make. And so again, I'm really just telling you that these things are out there. They're useful, and it's your own benefit to watch those. Now, having said that, let's talk about some of the assignment, some of the outlines that we just turned in. With those, again, some were great, some needed a lot of work, and I just finished those. They are submitted in terms of grade, and I replied to your post with um, your feedback. Now, on that note, let me just say quickly that to reference an email I sent out earlier, on the submission page, our discussion board, it says clearly that you need to use either a Google Doc or a Word doc, not a PDF. Why? Am I, not a fan of Adobe? No, it's not that at all. It's just that it's easier for me to give you better feedback when I can use a Google Doc or a Word doc. You can do some different things with PDFs, but I actually don't have the updated version of Adobe. It's weird. Like, I mean, our university's subscription ran out, or maybe com department's subscription ran out, and I can't renew that until I'm back on campus. So don't send me PDFs. I'll just not open those. But I was able to get to them this time, and I want to tell you what some common issues were. Number one, and I'll go through these as quickly as possible so we can all enjoy our weekend. The first thing, though, and the most important, is that many of your outlines were persuasive. Some were blatantly persuasive. You should do this. You should feel that way. Some were more subtle, where it was, here are some benefits of this thing, but they weren't balanced out by some drawbacks or some cons. So make sure that you're being as neutral as you can. Now, here's the big takeaway from this item. At the end of your informative speech, we as an audience should not know how you feel about your topic. We don't know what side you're going to be on. Now, let me be clear. If you're giving a speech on sexual assault, I don't expect us to wonder if you're in favor of sexual assault or not. Um, but you're probably in the persuasive speech going to tell us that either maybe like the university is doing a good job or they aren't, and if they aren't, here's what they should do. We shouldn't know how you feel about that. You can tell us that some people aren't satisfied with the way that universities or our university handles sexual assault, but you should also say things that are just factual, right? There are some people that do think it's an effective program, which is why we have it. Again, it shouldn't be clear where you are on this topic. So keep that in mind throughout the entirety of your speech. Second thing, sources. I don't expect all the sources to be in the outline. If they are, that's great. But with those, the reason I bring this up is some folks had the source in their outline and they had the author's name, and that was all. And I'm concerned that you are going to use that exact same copy when you are giving the presentation. And if you are, you're going to lose points because remember, you have to cite the publication, Time Magazine, New York Times, the Journal of Statistical Significance, whatever, and the date. Those are the two things. So keep those things in mind. Also, on the note of sources here, make sure that you are citing the right required sources. So you remember you have to have for this speech one peer-reviewed journal article and then two other just quality sources. If you're citing something that's not familiar, briefly, very briefly, explain it to us. Or if it's an acronym, explain that. Just say it out in its full form. Number 3, some of you are skipping items on the outline, and so you're kind of recreating it and then just leaving some things out. I saw this with transitions quite a bit. I saw this with items in like the introduction and the conclusion. Remember, all those things are there for a reason. They're important. They have a role to play. And if you just go through it as we did on the video, you'll see that this thing does flow together pretty well. I realize that some of you don't want to say things like, now that we've done this, we can move to that. You feel like those sorts of transitions aren't creative enough. They're not maybe letting you make this your own speech. And I understand that, but the rebuttal is this isn't the time to worry about that. This is the time to learn to give a quality speech, learn different formats that will help you be an empowered speaker. Then when you get out somewhere else besides here, you can make it your own. You can modify this as you get more and more experience with public speaking. But for now, we really just want to get the fundamentals down, and that is what I consider a fundamental. So be careful with skipping over or changing some of the items on the outline. Number 4, the transition between main point 2 and 3. Main points 2 and 3. Be careful with that one. Remember, for example, the transition between 1 and 2, we say, now that we talked about A, let's move on and talk about B. But, key, when you're going between main point 2 and main point 3, you'll say, now that we've talked about A and B, now let's move to C. So go all the way back to the beginning. I know it seems minor and inconsequential, but it can be a good way to keep your audience on track. The key thing for me is clarity. As you know, I've said that many times. But with these transitions, the audience as a whole needs to move from point to point with you and together as a group. And the best way to do that is for you to clearly signal that you are going somewhere new. And so the better you can remind folks, okay, look where we were, and now it makes sense for me to end up here, the audience will stay with you much more effectively. Okay, number 5. On your outlines that you just got back, again, those are in response. I just hit reply and then put the feedback there in your thread, either just written out if it was a PDF or if it was a Word doc. I just posted your doc there. Remember that if something is problematic in the introduction and that item reappears in the conclusion, you'll probably want to fix it both places. Some people had like a different thesis in the intro and another one in the conclusion. Why? They should be exactly the same. The statement of purpose should be exactly the same. The preview and review should be exactly the same. Really, the attention getter and the closure are going to be very similar. Some people weren't doing the same sort of material for their closure as they did for their attention getter. Make sure that you're doing that. You're coming what we called full circle for ring structure. So be careful with those things. Double check top and bottom, and please make sure it's consistent. If the 3 main points appear in one order in the preview, they should appear in that same order in the preview, the body, and the review at the end. So just make sure you're being consistent there. Number 6, one specific item in the intro and conclusion is the thesis statement. Some folks did fine with this. Other folks maybe struggled just to write a really high quality thesis. Other folks wrote a lot, right? So like a couple sentences or a paragraph. Remember, the thesis statement is one single concise sentence. And if you want to go back and watch that video, you can do that. But the key takeaway was, think of your favorite movie, whatever it is, and then go to IMDb and look it up. It will have the thesis of that movie listed there. It's a single sentence every single time. That is the way that I trained myself to write a thesis statement. I would like to look at the entirety of the speech because you do it last. Then I can sort of take it all as a whole and then try to get it down into one single line that summarizes without making a list, and explains without giving everything away so that you don't need to listen to the larger speech. If you can do those two things, you're going to have a good thesis. All right, number 7. Um, I've mentioned this already, actually. By the end of this speech, we shouldn't know how you feel. I can't stress that enough for the informative. Honestly, you all, the informative to me is more difficult than the persuasive by a mile. I mean, once you're getting to persuasion, the key thing you need to do there is bring in quality sources so that it's not just you stating your opinion. Anybody can do that, but you're backing it up with evidence and facts. The informative is more difficult, in my opinion, because you can't let us know how you feel. And you picked the topic, right? So you probably have a very cleanly established position on the issue. But hiding that, concealing that for the sake of objectivity and learning, boy, that can be tough. And so that's one of the lessons of just having this assignment, right? So be careful with the persuasion and letting us know how you feel. Last thing, and this goes back to some source material. When you're citing your sources, remember a couple things here. If you have a statistic, for example, I want you to cite that statistic every time you use one. The reason is anybody can throw a statistic out. There's this saying, and you can make it up as you go along. 85% of stats are made up 90% of the time with 20% accuracy, right? You can just keep going. It's bullshit, really. And so we want to make sure that you are using good material and that it's current. If you say so many people, this percentage do the thing, and your information is from the 80s or the 90s, that's changed in today's world. So we want to make sure that you are up to date. The other thing with sources, remember to use primary sources, not secondary sources. 2 levels here. On the sort of surface level, it's going to make you more credible to cite the journal article or the study or the individual who said something instead of maybe a news report where they discussed that study's findings or where they quoted that individual that made the statement. That's one level. A whole nother level, though, is something I saw in 2 different outlines today. A couple folks copy and pasted some material from a website or an article, and that's fine with me. Work smart, not hard. Hey, they said it pretty darn well. That's why it got published. So why would you try to recreate something that's already been done pretty well? You're fine there. The key thing is you need to give credit where it's due. And both of these individuals cited the article that they were copy and pasting from. However, in the material that they took and put over in their outline, there were footnotes in there. They were numbers that gave the impression that there are footnotes, which means that the source that was being cited other sources. So when you take that material, you need to also dig a little deeper, find the actual primary sources, and then you can go on from there, and you'll be fine. So my gripe is not about copy paste. No, please, it's a great idea. I do it a lot. Not for papers I submit for publication, but to get chunks of information so that I can organize things. You bet. I mean, it makes sense. But make sure you're taking that extra step to give credit where it's due. Now, to me, I see this completely as a learning process, right? This is something that maybe you weren't aware of, or you didn't notice that there were footnotes there. It's all right. No harm, no foul. But understand that there are professors on our campus and definitely others that they would see this and they would send it right away to someone above them, whether that was their department chair or a dean or whoever, and they would start a disciplinary process about this. That would end up you getting interviewed and the professor getting interviewed, and there'd be screenshots, and then they would have to decide basically if the common student, the average student, would have realized what they were doing or not. And if they decide that, you see the point here, you can get kicked out of school for that, and you don't want that. So take that as a lesson. Even if that wasn't you, or again, there were only two people, but if that wasn't you, know that for the future, that's an easy little trap to fall into. So take that for what it's worth. The big takeaways here: don't be persuasive, be informative, cite your sources clearly and thoroughly, follow the outline as it is presented there, and remember that by the end of the speech, we should not know how you feel about the specific topic that you're discussing. I hope this is helpful. Please watch the video. Of course, it doesn't do me a lot of good to say that here because, damn it, you are watching it. So thank you. And let me know if you have questions. Looking ahead to next week, your actual speech is due. Now, you know how to do this because you turned in an introduction speech. This is going to be the same way. There's no PowerPoint. I don't need any of that. I just need you talking, giving the speech. Ideally, you'll have some space between you and the camera so that you can move, but I am not totally concerned with that. Just remember to go back and look at the delivery items. There's a whole lecture on informative style where we talk about movement, gestures, posture, eye contact, you name it. Go back and review that before you record and submit. I noticed that 2 people have already submitted. If you want to, I don't think you can delete it at this point, but if you want to take the feedback from the outline and change your speech, submit a different version, you can do that. It's not too late to resubmit. In fact, it's not if you post one and then you go to sleep and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to do the thing, and it's still before Thursday at midnight. Do it again if you want, and just put a note in there, or send me an email saying, hey, I submitted before, but I don't want that one. I want this latest one that I submitted. I don't care. That's fine with me. There was one more thing I wanted to mention, and it seems to be eluding me. But in terms of the coursework itself, we're switching gears and going into persuasion. So make sure that you are checking into that. Don't forget. Oh, that was it. You do have to go to the speech lab if you want those 5 points before the informative speech. I know many of you have already gone, but many of you have not. So make sure you're doing that. Again, go to the website, go to the COVID-19 resources, and make a virtual consultation work for you. We're there 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday. So let me know if I can help. Go to the speech lab. Remember what we discussed, and have a wonderful weekend.